And joining me to discuss all that and more in the next half hour are three MEP candidates. Molly Scott-Cato for the Green Party, Ashley Fox from our Bristol studio for the Conservatives, and from Truro we're joined by Carl Benjamin for UKIP. And over the next couple of weeks we'll bring you candidates from other parties and a full list, as always, of course, on our website. Carl Benjamin brought UKIP's campaign to Truro this week, hot on the heels of fresh controversy about comments he made about rape aimed at the Labour MP Jess Phillips. His appearance in Cornwall attracted protesters and scuffles broke out. Jen Smith has this report.
A milkshake intended for Carl Benjamin caused a scuffle in Truro. The UKIP candidate is standing for the region in the upcoming European elections. But some protesters wanted to show their unhappiness as he tours the southwest.
You seem to want my attention.
I don't want your attention. I want these people's attention.
Okay, but you can have that by talking to us. I mean, you're getting it right now by talking to us.
You're the one who's here. I didn't come to you.
No,
See you later.
Who feels like they're being represented by the Parliament at the moment? No one. Not one hand up. Amazing.
But some think he shouldn't even be standing. This week, West Midlands Police said it was investigating Mr Benjamin over comments he made about the Labour MP Jess Phillips. She's questioned whether people who say offensive things should have a platform.
I felt like, how can somebody say that they would rape me if forced and be a legitimate candidate in an election? It was one thing when he was just some idiot off the internet with a load of bros following him. It's a different thing when he's standing on the same platforms that I'm standing on, that he will potentially go to a parliament himself as an elected representative. When he said these things, what I do fear for is my mental health, actually. And this is essentially like coercive control. Sometimes I'd rather someone were to punch me in the face than the constant degradation that you suffer as a woman in the public eye.
But Carl Benjamin is far from apologetic. In a video recently posted online, he said, "There's been an awful lot of talk about whether I would or wouldn't rape Jess Phillips. I've been in a lot of trouble for my hardline stance of not even raping her. I suppose with enough pressure I might cave, but let's be honest, nobody's got that much beer." And as of Friday, he's been joined on the campaign trail by the ultra-conservative writer Milo Yiannopoulos. A former British technology journalist, Yiannopoulos describes himself as a free speech fundamentalist, but others call him racist and a misogynist.
I'm sort of terrified by the turn that things have taken in America. I expect it here. Hasn't really been free speech here for a really long time. We're used to having people tell us what we can say and what we can do and how we can think.
If there are limits in the language of politics, UKIP doesn't seem clear over whether Mr Benjamin has reached them. Before the police investigation was revealed, the party leader told Andrew Marr it was just satire.
He is not a bad person, as he's trying to be portrayed.
He sounds like any other party would have kicked him out, and you've made him your lead MEP candidate.
He is a proponent of free speech. That was in the context that he said it was satire against the people he was saying it about. He wasn't actually making a literal statement.
A UKIP spokesperson has now told us they're no longer commenting, but they still support him as a candidate. So does saying it was just a joke always wash? Dr. Simon Weaver is an academic researching offensive jokes.
He is using a humorous mode. He is being ironic. He isn't offering literal description or communication. So he is engaged in joking. But jokes are never just jokes. Jokes always convey meaning. They're rhetorical in structure. They can form convincing communication. They can upset people. They can make people laugh as well. And I think probably Carl Benjamin intends to upset people. I think, his audience are engaged in that type of activity.
Dr. Weaver says the research shows that some humour can release existing prejudices, and in the case of rape jokes, it can mean the crime is seen as less serious. This week, a fellow UKIP candidate resigned from the party mid-campaign in protest over Mr Benjamin's comments. But for Carl Benjamin, a police investigation is pending, but it may be that the public vote takes place before any official conclusion can be drawn.
Carl Benjamin, you were laughing and smiling there listening to Jess Phillips. So you're still of the view, to be clear, that it's perfectly fine to make a joke about raping somebody and naming a specific individual?
Well, the thing that you are doing with all of this is mischaracterizing what has gone on. I mean, you started with the opening preamble saying, I came here on the heels of controversy after a comment I made, and scuffles broke out. Well, hang on a second, right? Scuffles didn't break out. We were attacked. The controversy is you decontextualizing the joke. It's not a comment, it's a joke. And it wasn't made to Jess Phillips. It was made to a closed audience on my YouTube channel that the media has then extracted, decontextualized, and put in front of everyone's faces. I didn't send this to Jess Phillips. You guys did.
No, but it was put in the public domain. What is funny?
Yes, and do you not think that you have some responsibility not to blow it up everywhere? I mean, would you take a joke from a comedy club or any kind of a Netflix special or something and then do that, even if the joke was about someone else?
OK, you're contesting the fact that we described this. We described your arrival this week as being following recent controversy. You returned to this issue yourself and reheated it this week. It's
controversy the media has created. You are lying about the context of the statement. You're calling it a comment. It's not a comment. It's a joke.
Why do you?
It's not a serious statement of intent.
Is anything beyond the pale in terms of humour for you? Most people would probably take the view that jokes.
Not for humour, no.
What? So jokes about the Holocaust or child abuse would be perfectly acceptable. A laugh could be squeezed out of something like that.
And anything can be joked about. That's the point. That's the reason we have jokes, is to remove the horror from a particularly negative thing. That's why British troops survived so well in the trenches in World War I and II. They were famous for their dark humour to help them cope with life and cope with the terrible things that happened.
They were joking about something awful that was going on around them. You've conjured up the notion of raping a woman, a named woman.
No, that's not true.
You've created a problem for her.
I said that I would not even do it. This was a joke at Jess's expense. That was, don't get me wrong, it was a mean thing to say.
There was also a sideswipe, presumably, at her appearance in that, or, her attractiveness in your eyes. What has any of this got to do with politics? That's the point. You were standing for election. She's an elected politician.
Why are you bringing it up?
Well, because you say these things. I mean, if you just decided to engage with Jess Phillips or any other politician on Brexit or the health service or defence or the economy, none of this would have arisen. You're saying highly controversial things, and then you're expressing surprise that people take issue with it.
I am expressing surprise that you will actually lie about the way I said something to rile up radically left-wing activists, to then come and attack me in the streets of Truro and call it a scuffle that broke out. It didn't break out. We were attacked. That's a totally deterministic way of viewing it, as if these left-wing activists had no responsibility for their own actions, as if us going there to have a dialogue and asking them to talk is us being just as culpable as them when they attack us.
Okay.
It's unreal the way that you frame these things.
OK, I just want to invite some comment from other guests. So, Molly, what's your thinking?
Well, I won't comment directly on what your other guest said, because that will legitimise his misogyny and his racism. But I've done quite a study of the rise of the far right, and it's very clear that these type of tactics of provoking victimhood, provoking violence, making attacks, creating controversy is a tool that they use deliberately, creating division. I represent people across the southwest in minority communities, ethnic minority communities, who are very fearful about rise in hate crime and hate speech, and my job is to be in solidarity with them and to resist all this kind of behaviour.
OK, Ashley Fox.
I think the comments are disgusting, and I'd much rather talk about the European elections than a fringe candidate.
OK, well, that's the plan for the rest of the programme. Another week on the campaign trail saw candidates out and about across the region. Manifestos were launched and hustings took place in Falmouth. Here's Lucy Fisher on the week's events.
Thursday night at Falmouth University.
Hello and welcome to Questions on College Stuff, our European election special.
First of the hustings is underway.
We're kind of in uncharted territory, so just see what happens, but we can't avoid having elections. We've got to have elected representatives.
I guess it's getting like a good gauge of where the public view is at the moment in relation to Brexit.
With both the Remain and Leave vote likely to be split between the parties, how worried are the candidates?
I no longer take the UKIP party seriously. I'm not sure that I ever took it very seriously, but I certainly once took it more seriously than I do now. And I would expect most people would be voting for the Brexit party. So I'm not that worried. And if I were worried, for heaven's sake, just how split is the Remain vote?
I told you I'd be honest. I think it's unfortunate because what I'd love to see is evidence, as we saw in the local elections, of a reaction against Brexit and more of a Remainer resistance forming. Sadly, we weren't allowed to make alliances. It's just not legal.
And what about the chance of Labour and the Tories forging a deal before elections take place?
Well, we haven't had much of a chance, to be honest, because for the first over 2 years, we weren't invited to the table at all. It's only really recently that Theresa May has said to Jeremy Corbyn, come on, let's talk and let's see if we can agree a deal. So it took a long time to get there.
And where does it leave the Tories trying to pick up votes in these elections?
Oh, it's it's a big policy for the Conservatives, and we need to get it right. So if we hang our hat on something like this, we need to just get on with it and deliver Brexit as soon as possible.
Meanwhile, up in Bristol, the Lib Dems launched their South West campaign this week, acknowledging the challenge in a region that voted Leave.
It is challenging, especially in a region where you can see the damage that will be done by Brexit. I mean, it seems astonishing, for instance, that Cornwall voted to leave. You know, Cornwall have had £10 billion of investment in the last 20 years. For every pound somebody puts in Cornwall to the EU, they get £10 back in subsidies.
And the Greens launched their manifesto.
We're tough on Brexit, yes, but we're tough on the causes of Brexit. Now, people in my family voted Leave. Lord Ashcroft did extensive polling of Leave voters, and it's very, very clear that it isn't just about immigration or the structures of the European Union. There's a feeling that people aren't being heard, and that anger has got louder since the Brexit vote, not quieter.
Now, Molly, I'd suggest that one thing you do have in common with Carl Benjamin and UKIP is that on your respective sides of this debate, you're competing in a very crowded marketplace for the same voters. In his case, for Leave voters, people who want a so-called clean Brexit. In your case, for the Remain vote.
I don't think we are actually competing. I think we've got a completely unique selling point here because we're very clearly a Remain party, but at the same time we've got a strong position on climate, and we're attracting a lot of votes from the Labour Party because people who voted for Labour in the general election in 2017 then had their vote used to justify Brexit, and because the Labour Party will not come out clearly against Brexit, Labour voters are now seeing that Green is an alternative for them, which makes it clear that they're for staying in the EU.
But yeah, with respect, it's probably the European issue people are focusing on, but the marketplace is even more crowded on your side of the argument than it is on Carl Benjamin's, because you've also got the Lib Dems and Change UK. You're all saying the same thing. We're the party of Remain.
We're really not saying the same thing. I mean, people have to have a choice in a democracy. This isn't only a referendum on Brexit. We're hoping we'll have that later in the year. But this is actually a choice about who you want to represent you in the European Parliament. My ambition is to stop Brexit. If that's the case, I would like to represent people for 5 years. So it's really important what position I take on climate, what position I take on sustainable farming, what position I take on tax avoidance. And that's what people should be voting on.
For instance, the Liberal Democrats' success in the local elections is pretty unhelpful to you, isn't it? If people are weighing up, ardent Remainers are weighing up these choices.
Well, the Lib Dems have spun that very effectively, but actually there were lots.
Well, they did well in the elections. I mean,
so did we, though. Their votes, their number of seats increased by 100%. Ours increased by 300%. There were lots of places like the Forest, like Mendip, where actually we got Forest of Dean, yes. Lots of places like that where we actually got far more votes than the Liberal Democrats. So they've done a very good spinning job. Our spinning machine wasn't quite as effective, but our vote will come out on the 23rd of May.
OK. Ashley Fox, last week, talking to the Conservative candidate, she was still taking the line which the party obviously was very keen on for a long time. They were hoping the elections wouldn't take place. The Deputy Prime Minister confirmed this week they will take place. Can you finally now say how you plan to contest the elections?
The elections are going to take place, and the Conservative Party will be saying that we want to deliver Brexit. We will honour the referendum result, and we will deliver Brexit in an orderly manner. And that is what a vote Conservative is for at these European elections.
Yeah, but what does that mean in practice? I mean, we know the situation we're in at Westminster is the Prime Minister made multiple attempts to get her deal through the Commons. I think I'm right in saying that you were pretty keen supporter of that, but nonetheless the position we're in now is the Prime Minister's conceded she needs to have cross-party talks with Labour. You know that any potential deal that emerges from those talks is likely to be very, very unpalatable to a lot of Conservative supporters and will not be seen as delivering Brexit.
Well, Martin, democracy is sometimes a messy business, and the House of Commons has voted against the Prime Minister's deal. And it's also voted against leaving without a deal. It's voted against all the options. So we have to keep working. We need to work with members of Parliament in the House of Commons, and we need to get this done. We need to get Brexit over the line, because I think it would be very damaging for British democracy if we were to renege on the referendum result, if we didn't honour it. And I really think the Labour Party have an important question to answer, which is that 2 years ago in the general election, they said they would honour the referendum result. Now, since then, almost all Conservative MPs have voted for Brexit, either with a deal or without. And almost all Labour MPs have voted against it in every form. So the Labour Party are saying one thing to the electors and they're doing another in the House of Commons. And that is why we have this impasse. And the Conservatives are going to keep working to deliver Brexit in an orderly manner. And that is what the people want us to do.
OK, Carl Benjamin, stick with the Tories if you really want Brexit delivered.
Well, I think that's a bit of a joke, is it not? I mean, I thought I was the comedian here. The Conservatives are the major barrier to Brexit. Because honestly, I think that fundamentally none of you people understand why any of the regular folk like myself voted to leave. I mean, the piece very shortly before this was for every pound a person from Cornwall gave to the European Union, they received £10 in return. Why would they leave such an advantageous and favourable relationship? Well, because they don't want to be dependents on the European Union. What they want is their own prosperity, because fundamentally there are some things that are just more important than money. And golden chains may be very beautiful, but I think that the people of Cornwall would probably prefer to have their own self-determination to be able to, I don't know, restore their fishing industry or something like that.
With respect, Carl, you're not obviously necessarily disagreeing with Ashley too much at the moment. I'm really asking why people should be voting for UKIP rather than taking Ashley's advice and saying, trust us to get on and deliver Brexit.
Ashley is giving you empty platitudes. UKIP actually stand for self-determination. They understand why people wanted to leave. The Conservative Party, frankly, they're still a party half full of Remainers. And any Remainer at this point who actually is trying to overturn the Brexit referendum should be ashamed of themselves. It's every Briton's duty to support Brexit for the good of the country now. We have to be in closed ranks about this. It's just not an option to try and overthrow this.
Molly. We seem to have, in Carl, somebody who's got into politics through the prism of the referendum. How would you react to his points?
Well, Brexit is no longer supported by a majority of British people, and the Brexit referendum, which we're supposed to honour, was actually a crime scene. There was illegality, there was overspending, there were lies told, and the mandate was never sound.
Neither side of the campaign covered themselves with glory, did they, to be honest?
No, but only one side's being investigated by the National Crime Agency. If this had taken place in Zimbabwe, we would have said it was not a legitimate result. We should take that very seriously because there are threats to the rule of law here. But besides that, what was promised in 2016 is not being delivered. Brexit is totally different from the promises that were made. And we need to ask people whether they still think this is what's best for the country. And that's why I'm supporting a people's vote.
Ashley, I mean, there is an argument, isn't there, which some small number of Conservative MPs support, saying, well, actually, there's some validity in that. And the Prime Minister's deal, we're told by Labour, would get through the Commons if she made that, if made conditional on a confirmatory vote, a public vote.
I think we need to honour the referendum result in 2016. I don't agree with Molly. We need to honour it, and we will cause immense damage to the British political system if we don't. And the Conservative Party is the only party that can deliver Brexit. And we need to work with the House of Commons to ensure that happens. And empty platitudes from fringe parties are meaningless, because how many MPs do they have in the House of Commons? How will they deliver Brexit? And the answer is they can't. And we are determined to deliver this for the British people.
To be fair, I mean, you know, you're in government but it's not a great time politically or electorally.
We're a minority government.
For the Conservative Party. And surely you would concede for a lot of your traditional supporters, if the Brexit you deliver, for instance, involves a customs union, you're going to have a lot of disappointed voters who are going to be heading off in the direction of UKIP or the Brexit Party?
I absolutely don't want a deal that includes a customs union. But any deal has to go through the House of Commons. Now, the House of Commons has voted against leaving with no deal. And it's also voted against leaving with the Prime Minister's deal. So the House of Commons needs to decide what it wants. Is it going to honour the referendum result or isn't it? And I think we need to call out the behaviour of the vast majority of Labour MPs who were elected 2 years ago saying one thing and are now dishonouring that promise to respect the referendum result.
From Labour next week. But just quickly to you, Carl. Ashley says you're a fringe party. We heard Anne Widdecombe, of course, former Tory, saying that she doesn't really worry much about UKIP anymore. I mean, the reality is, isn't it, that once it was a force in the land. I mean, it beat the Tories at the last European elections. It basically brought about the referendum. But now you've fallen out with Nigel Farage, and he's headed off as head of his own outfit. You're in a fairly parlous situation.
Well, politics changes, as I'm sure the Conservatives are learning to their chagrin, given their poll ratings. But I think that it's rather laughable to say that the Conservatives are going to deliver Brexit. Well, we're all waiting. Where is it? I don't actually want to have to stand for an office. I didn't go to the right schools. I don't have the right connections. I'm not part of the Westminster consensus. And yet I have to, because of the way that the Conservatives are mishandling it. And, I mean, Anne Widdecombe's comments are Anne Widdecombe's comments, and she's got many interesting comments and opinions of her own, but of course that's what they would say because they're our opposition. So I don't really take it with any great deal of credibility. But to be honest with you, no one really seems to understand why we're doing any of this. The people of Britain voted for self-determination. The people who were on the other side of that argument have to come to terms with the fact that they lost that argument. They just have to own it.
I want to move on, but just again to you, Molly. You should accept the referendum result and show humility.
This is totalitarianism. There's only to be one view. In any democracy, there will be multiple views. It's my job to represent people, and they're now the majority who think we should stay in the European Union.
But elections resolve them, don't they, for the time being, at least? Shouldn't this referendum at least be implemented for a time? And
definitely not, because it was won through criminality and lying. But even if it hadn't been, this idea of honouring a referendum that happened 3 years ago is just a really bizarre thing. The situation's moved on. Brexit means something different from what was promised, and people have changed their minds. So that's 3 reasons why we should have another vote now.
OK. Well, a government, as we've been saying, with no majority, unable to get its most important business through Parliament and approaching an election it was desperately hoping wouldn't even happen, can scarcely afford to learn that one of its own MPs is now going on strike. Theresa May received a letter this week from Plymouth MP Johnny Mercer saying he will not be voting for any of the government's legislation unless it's Brexit-related. Jenny Coomer reports.
He tried to get some dirt and blackmail me to vote for the Prime Minister's deal in January.
Johnny Mercer's been quite fed up with politics recently.
Nice place, politics.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Yeah, why did I sign up?
But it was talking to this veteran last week that moved him to take a stand against his own party.
I think that's our telephone conversation, what we had. And I'm pleased that it contributed to what he did. And I just, as I said before, I hope that it'll make others stand up and do the same.
Last week, as I was driving back to London to do my duties in Parliament, I received a telephone call from a friend of mine down here. He's 77 years old. He has got failing kidneys. He's refused dialysis because he wants to fight his case, and he will most likely die before it comes to court. And that's our kind of thank you for your service on behalf of the nation.
Dennis Hutchings is a former soldier from Cornwall. He's due to be tried for attempted murder in connection with a fatal shooting in Northern Ireland in 1974, which he denies.
There are 4 million veterans in this country, and to be quite honest, if they don't do something about it, then we will, the veterans. We'll bring this country to a standstill if we have to.
Johnny Mercer says the armed forces are his tribe. Before becoming an MP, the former captain did several tours in Afghanistan. Since his election in 2015, he's campaigned against the pursuit of legacy cases from the conflicts in Northern Ireland, Afghanistan and Iraq. In a letter this week, he effectively told the Prime Minister that he was going on strike, writing, I will not be voting for any of the government's legislative actions outside of Brexit until legislation is brought forward to protect veterans from being repeatedly prosecuted for historical allegations.
And those who break the law should be held to account. But that's not what this is about. This is about repeated vexatious allegations for which there is no new evidence. And actually, you know, I have enormous sympathy for the families of victims who've been through this process. The only people who are getting anything out of this are lawyers.
In a statement, Downing Street says, "The issue of prosecutions of veterans is one we take extremely seriously, and the PM is fully aware of the strength of feeling on this. But just how much of a difference will Johnny Mercer's strike make? Some are questioning if his protest really can have an impact, if he's still going to support the government on Brexit legislation, which is dominating the government's agenda."
Molly, have you got any thoughts on either the action Johnny Mercer's taken or the underlying issue?
I think Johnny Mercer has been absolutely right to stick up for the veterans. I think veterans are treated appallingly. A lot of people in prison are veterans. A lot of people sleeping rough on our streets are veterans, and they haven't been looked after properly by the government. Where I take issue with him is the fact that he seems to set himself up as some sort of authority over what the law should be doing and who should be prosecuted. That's simply not his job. And I just find it a little bit worrying, really, that he thinks he can somehow blackmail the Prime Minister into leaving these cases when that's an issue for the law, and we have to have separation of powers. So the legal system is here, Johnny Mercer's over here, and mixing up the two is not very helpful.
So the government, as we've heard, accepts there's some problems with this process. You wouldn't even go that far, you think?
I mean, I don't know the legal details, so it's not really possible for me to say, but I think that should be left to due legal process. It shouldn't be interfered with by politicians. That's the basis of our constitution.
Carl Benjamin?
I think that the problem with veterans generally, the problems that the government has with veterans, probably stems from a lack of patriotism and faith in the country at large, but that's hardly surprising given the way that things are going at the moment. There seems to be a great deal of, frankly, ill faith towards the British public as a whole. And I think a lot of it has been drummed up by the referendum.
OK, Ashley Fox, a very unusual situation, but obviously in terms of, the political rules, we're living in strange times. So Johnny Mercer's basically saying he's largely not taking the Tory whip without actually resigning it. What's your reaction to this?
Well, I'm a great fan of Johnny Mercer. I campaigned for him in 2015 when he got elected, and I think he's done great work on behalf of veterans. I'll admit to being slightly surprised to see his letter, but that's really a matter for him. OK, thank you, all three of you. I'll be back next week with my final panel of Euro candidates before the elections. See you then.